Thank you everyone for joining me today in my thesis defense. Today I'm going to talk about structural changes in glasses under periodic shear deformation. So to give an outline, I'll be briefly talking about glasses, what happens to a glass as we shear the system. Especially, I'll be discussing about periodic shear deformation, yielding and shear band. And we'll look into this through structural changes and we'll be discussing that from two routes. One is hyperuniformity and the other is local structural order. So what is a glass? A glass is a disordered arrested state of matter. So we can obtain a glass starting from a high temperature liquid by cooling it really fast so that it does not have time to release latent heat and arrange themselves in a crystalline ordered structure. So to give an example from our everyday life, we can think of a glass of water, let's say, and the common material used for that is SiO2, which can exist both in crystalline and amorphous glassy state at room temperature. Now, there are also other different kinds of glasses apart from silica glasses. For example, we can have metallic glasses, which are thought of the next generation materials because it can be very strong like a steel, and yet it can be moldable to any form or shape. Other examples of glasses will include colloidal glasses, polymer glasses, involving a wide range of length scales. Now, as I said, that glass is a disordered state, arrested state of matter, but not all disordered state of matter is a glass. A glass is characterized by the glass transition, and the changes happens during this glass transition. For example, we can think of thermal property. In case of crystallization from liquid to crystal state, there is a well-defined melting temperature where the system releases latent heat and becomes a crystal. Now, for glass transition, this transition from liquid to glass state is a continuous transition, and there is no latent heat involved. Now, if we think of dynamical properties, the viscosity changes dramatically for glass transition. It rises to the of the order of 10 to the power 12 in magnitude. Now, the mechanical properties also change during glass transition. For example, we can think of a piece of cheese. If the temperature is quite low, if the cheese is frozen, it will behave like a solid. At little bit higher temperature, it will become stretchy and rubbery. And then at much higher temperature, if you put it on flames, then it will simply flow. Now, in the study of glasses, computer simulation has played a very important role. In this thesis also, we are using molecular dynamics simulation, where we start from particles with different sizes that helps us avoid crystallization, and we set up an interaction potential. For example, here I'm showing the Lennard-Jones potential, which historically has been used widely for the studies of glass forming materials. And once we have a interaction potential, we can solve Newton's equations of motion. And we can attach the system to thermal bath to generate equilibrated liquid configurations at different temperatures. Now we can compute the intermediate scattering function, which describes with reference to some initial time how a system relaxes. So for example, for high temperature, this relaxation will be very fast. And for low temperatures, it will take much more time to relax from the initial configuration. In fact, for the glass forming materials, this kind of two-step relaxation at low temperature is a characteristic phenomena. So in shorter time, the local degrees of freedom relaxes, which is known as the beta relaxation, and in long time, the degrees of freedom over larger length scale relaxes. Pictorially, we can think of this as in shorter time, the particle is trapped by the cage formed by its neighbors, and in long time, when all parts of the system is starting to move, it can escape from the cage, relaxing from its initial configuration. Now, this alpha relaxation time actually diverges at glass transition. So from the simulations, it is not possible for us to relax a system until it reaches to its glassy state. So how do we obtain a glass from an equilibrated system? For that, we need to understand the potential energy landscape. So I have n number of particles interacting through some potential. So if I plot the potential energy with the particle coordinates, which is a very high dimensional space, and this is only a schematic representation, we'll see that we have a very rugged energy surface with lots of minimas and maximas. In general, for amorphous states, the height of the minima is much higher compared to the crystalline state. So we can think that the evolution of the glassy material in liquid state is basically the diffusion through available inherent structures. So to obtain a glass, what we can do is we can start from equilibrated liquid configuration, and then we can minimize the energy of the system so that the system gets stuck into one of these energy minimum inherent structure configuration. So on the left, on the top, I have a configuration in liquid states, and these little arrows shows the direction of forces. And once we have minimized this energy, we see that all forces, torques, everything vanish. So we end up having a arrested state of the material. And these inherent structures provide a very good understanding of what happens to glass. So for example, in this thesis, we'll be sharing these inherent structures to understand the rheology in glass. So in the study of rheology, one of the most interesting question is how a system will respond if I'm trying to deform the system. So for that, one can plot the stress strain curve. One can have a brittle response, for example, like a window glass, where the system resists the deformation until some point and then breaks abruptly. One can also have ductile response, where the system resists the deformation until some point, and then the system starts to flow, having permanent deformation in the system. So once there is permanent deformation, the system cannot go back to its initial state. We can also have a material which is so ductile that we cannot really differentiate between the elastic and the flow part, and it seems quite a continuous change. Yielding is defined as the transition between the elastic and the flow regime. So in the elastic regime, if I remove the load, the system can go back to its initial state, whereas in the flow regime, it cannot. Another interesting occurrence in the high strain flow regime is the appearance of shear band. So what happens if my strain is too large? In the system, we get to see permanent deformation where strain is localized. And so on top, I have an example from a piece of mud, and below is an example of shear band formation for a metallic glass. So now the question is that for a system, how the particles rearrange in forming the shear band. For that, let's see what happens from energy landscape perspective. So if I am shearing a system, what I am doing essentially is I am changing the potential energy landscape. At some point, the system prefers to sit in the local energy minimum basin. But if my deformation is large, at some point, one local energy minimum will disappear and system will be forced to move to the new local energy minimum. And the way system does so is locally rearranging the particles. So in the elastic regime, this kind of rearrangements are reversible. That means when I remove the load, the system can go back to its initial position. But in the flow regime, these rearrangements are irreversible, and the system cannot go back to its initial state. Now, given a system, how can we identify the regions that are taking part into these rearrangements? We can do so by computing the non-affine displacement, which basically measures for each particle what is the change of local strain. So here is a zoom of a system where the particles are rearranging. So at time 0, this square minimum value is 0 for all the particles. There is no rearrangements because it's the initial configuration. Then as we go along with time, we see that there is a zone of particles in darker shade that has gone through rearrangement. So this kind of zone of particles that are taking part into plastic rearrangements because of shear is called the shear transformation zone. and they play a role in the formation of shear band. To understand how, we can look into the illustration right, where we are plotting the intensity of D square minimum at two different time steps. Initially, these STZs are localized and scattered all over the place, but with time, they correlate in the formation of shear band. Uh, so now in this thesis, we are particularly interested into periodic shear deformation. What we do is we start from initial configuration without deformation, then we slowly increment the strain in one direction, and we do it really slowly so there is no shear rate involved. We go from zero strain to some strain amplitude gamma max, then we come back to the other direction to minus gamma max, and then we go back to the zero strain configuration. So we keep repeating this for many cycles, and after each step of strain increment, we minimize the energy of the system so that it is always sitting in the local energy minimum state. And at the end of the cycles, we actually analyze the stroboscopic configurations where the value of instantaneous strain is 0. So if we plot the energy of the stroboscopic configuration with the deformation cycles, we'll see that depending on the strain amplitude, the system reaches to different energy minimum states. So the asymptotic energies of the system decrease as we shear the system. So if we plot the asymptotic energies as a function of shear amplitude, we can see this decrease of energy. So the glass system now explores deeper energy minimum as we are shearing the system. This is known as the mechanical annealing in glasses, and this keeps on happening until the system is yielded. Once the system is yielded, if my strain amplitude is high, then there is a sharp jump in the energy, and this sharp transition from the states below yielding and above yielding is quite clear from this energy plot. Now, this happens for a system which was initially prepared at high temperature. If we repeat this analysis for a system prepared at lower temperature, we will see that this annealing effect is not that strong. And interestingly, no matter what was their initial temperature, upon crossing the yielding amplitude, the system reaches to same energy state. We can also track the movement of the particles from one cycle to the next and compute their mean square displacement. So for example, if we plot their mean square displacement with the deformation cycle, we will see for shear amplitudes below yielding, this mean square displacement becomes a constant. That means in this regime, from one cycle to the next, there is no net displacement of the system. So the particles do rearrange during the deformation cycle, but they come back to their initial positions in the steady state. Whereas above yielding, the mean square displacement keeps increasing and we have a diffusive state, and we can extract the diffusivity constant. So if we plot the diffusivity constant as a function of shear amplitude, we'll see below yielding the diffusivity constant is 0 and above yielding will have a finite diffusivity. So the yielding amplitude marks a transition from non-diffusive to diffusive state in the system. Now above yielding, even though the overall system is diffusive, as it turns out, not all parts of the system move equivalently. So here is an example for a system at gamma max equal to 0.09 above yielding, where we are doing a color map of particles displacements from one cycle to the next in the steady state. And we can see that there is a band of red particles which are moving much faster compared to the other part of the system. This is actually the mobile shear band regime in the system. So if we plot the steady state energies, what we see is below yielding, the energy of the system decreases because of annealing, and above yielding, the energy jumps to higher value. But a more close examination will reveal that inside the shear band, actually the energy is higher compared to the part outside of shear band. This gives us an indication that the structure in different parts of the system in presence of shear band might have different nature. We'll come back to this point when we'll be discussing through hyperuniformity and local structural order. So the question is, as we go from states below yielding to above yielding, is there any structural changes in the system? Barthier, in his paper of 2016, also looked into this from the calculation of structure factor for a system that is going from the reversible to diffusive transition. And we are going to look into the same question from hyperuniformity and local structural order. So first, moving to hyperuniformity. What is hyperuniformity? If I have to describe hyperuniformity in one line, I will say hyperuniformity is suppression of density fluctuations at large length scales. To understand that, we can look into these three very different types of point distribution. In the middle, we have a completely random point distribution. So if we look into the system in different parts by putting some observation window, and we count how many points are there inside this observation window, the number will fluctuate quite largely. In fact, for a system in 3 dimension, this number variance, n square average minus n average square, will scale as the volume of the window. That means it will scale as r cube. Now, if I have a system, if I have a distribution where this scaling of number variance is lower than r cube, then I have a hyperuniform system. So to give an example, we can look into the ordered arrangement. In this case, there will be no difference in the bulk, and the only difference will be because of the surface where the surface is cutting the points. So in this particular case, the number variance will scale as r square instead of r cube. So this is an example of ordered hyperuniform system. Now, the most interesting part is when the system is disordered and yet it is hyperuniform. So hyperuniformity basically means that this number variance or the density variance is actually getting suppressed at large length scales. And large length scales mean that in low wave vector regime, we can relate it to the structure factor. And from in low wave vector regime, it is related to the structure factor, and the relation of number variance is something like this. And in turn, it is also related to the compressibility of the system. So basically, we can examine the system, a hyperuniform system, from also the Fourier space analysis. So we can look into, for example, the scattering intensity. Here is an example from a lattice configuration and from a disordered stealthy hyperuniform material, where we see that for the disordered stealthy hyperuniform system, close to the origin, there is no scattering. So this scattering intensity is proportional to the structure factor. So for a hyperuniform system, close to the origin, the structure factor will tend to vanish. In fact, we can in the low wave vector regime, we can feed a power law to the structure factor, and we can extract the exponent of the power law, alpha, which is called the hyperuniformity exponent. And depending on the hyperuniformity exponent, we can classify hyperuniform systems in different classes. And this exponent is actually related to the number variance that we just saw in the last slide. For example, if the exponent is in between 0 to 1, then the number variance will scale as r to the power d minus alpha in a d-dimensional system. For last 2 decades, hyperuniformity has been found in lots of systems. Here, I am only presenting 3 such examples. In the left, I have a system of jammed particles, which in which case it was found that at critical jamming density, the structure factor tends to vanish linearly close to the origin. And later, upon many exploration, it was conjectured that all maximally randomly jammed sphere packings will be hyperuniform in nature. Hyperuniformity has also been found in biological systems. So, for example, in the retina of a chicken, there are 5 types of cone cells which are random. And then the question was how, even though the bird has a random cone cell distribution, it can have a good vision. The answer to that was that the way these cone cells were distributed was in a hyperuniform fashion, and that helped the bird to achieve optimal vision. Now, in the right, I have an example of non-equilibrium transition where the authors look into the Manna model, and depending on the cycle of activation, this Manna model shows a transition from absorbing to diffusive state. And authors found that in absorbing states, the system is hyperuniform in nature, whereas in diffusive state, it is not. Here to note, in case of our system of glasses going through periodic shear deformation, we also have a transition from a non-diffusive to a diffusive state. So it is interesting to see what happens to the system in the context of hyperuniformity. So for that, we start with the model glass former, which is a 50-50 binary mixture of particles interacting through Lennard-Jones potential. We work at high density 1.2 and high temperature. And for this system, the yielding amplitude is 0.07. First, we look into the system and what happens even before shearing. So we compute the wave vector dependent compressibility instead of the structure factor. Because in fact, this compressibility is a function of partial structure factors. And for a system to be hyperuniform, this compressibility will have a power law dependence in the low wave vector regime. So we can see that clearly there is a difference between liquid and the corresponding inherent structure. In fact, in the low wave vector regime, the liquid is flat, and for the inherent structure, we can fit it to a power law. The exponent of power law, as it turns out to be 0.4, meaning that the inherent structure is hyperuniform in nature. Interestingly, at very low wave vectors, we see that the plot deviates from the hyperuniform power law fit, and that is because the system does have finite compressibility. We confirm that this deviation is indeed a property of the system, and it is not merely because we have a smaller system size. And we confirm this from going 64,000 of particles to 256,000 of particles, and we see the exact trend. That means we now can see that the inherent structures obtained from the high temperature, high density liquid to be hyperuniform up to finite length scales. Next, we see what happens to the system as we shear the system. So we again compute the compressibility for different shear amplitudes across the yielding amplitude. So what we see is below yielding, my system is hyperuniform and the exponent of the fit is close to 0.4. Above yielding, the hyperuniformity exponent alpha decreases dramatically, and we now have non-hyperuniform system above yielding. Another interesting thing is in the low wave vector part, we see a upturn in the compressibility curves, meaning that there is strong fluctuation in the system. So next we look into the hyperuniformity analysis from the real space number density variance. So we put some observation windows and we compute the number density variance, rho square average minus rho average square. And for a system to be hyperuniform, this variance will scale as r to the power minus 3 plus alpha. We see that indeed for the cases of shear amplitudes below yielding, we have a scaling that is r to the power minus 3.4, and above yielding, my system is no more hyperuniform. So now we want to see what is happening above yielding. So for that, we choose one particular window size, that is r equal to 10, and we see what is the probability distribution of the density field below and above yielding. We find that below yielding, the probability distribution of the density has a single peak around the bulk density 1.2, whereas above yielding, it has two peaks, one at a density lower than 1.2 and the other at a density higher than 1.2. So, from the extent of the distribution above yielding, we can see why it will have strong fluctuation. So we now want to see that these two distribution, where it is located in our simulated system. We see that in fact this two distribution is localized in space, and that is actually coincide with the shear band present in the system. We further analyze the system for the shear amplitude gamma max equal to 0.09 above yielding in presence of shear band. So in presence of shear band, if we again uh, do a color map of the particles from particle displacements from one cycle to the next, we can see where the shear band is located, and it is perpendicular to x. So along x, we can bin the system and plot the mean square displacement to locate the shear band exactly. So the shear band is the part with high mobility. And if we compute the density of the system, we see that there is a dip in the shear band regime. That means the shear band regime has lower density compared to the parts outside. This result was already observed by Anshul previously. So now we want to see if the upturn in the compressibility that we saw above yielding was indeed because of the shear band present in the system. How we do it is, instead of taking the wave vector k to be a 3D wave vector as a function of kx, ky, kz, we now choose three cases, one putting kx0, ky0, and kz0. So for kx0, we are essentially computing the compressibility for planes which are parallel to the shear band, and we recover the hyperuniform trend. And for the planes which are perpendicular to the shear band, which is seeing the interface between the shear band and the part outside of it, we recovered the upturn. So we now confirm that the upturn that we had seen above yielding is because of the shear band present in the system. Now we are interested that from hyperuniformity, what is the exact uh, 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 what exactly happening in different subvolumes in the system in presence of shear band. So for example, we now put some observation windows in the shear band regime, in the part outside of shear band, and in the part that extends that includes the interface between the shear band and outside shear band regime. When we do so, we compute the number density variance and extract the hyperuniformity index alpha, hyperuniformity exponent alpha. We see that below yielding, when there is no shear band, of course, my system is hyperuniform in the absorbing states. And above yielding, the parts outside of shear band and the parts inside of shear band is still continues to be hyperuniform. And we lose the hyperuniformity when we include the interface between these two regimes. So to conclude, so far, what we have seen is inherent structures obtained from high density, high temperature liquid is hyperuniform up to some finite length scale. And as we shear the system remains hyperuniform in the absorbing state. Above yielding, the system loses hyperuniformity because of the interface formed between the shear band and outside of shear band. But separately, the parts inside and outside still continues to be hyperuniform. Next, we'll be moving to the final part of the presentation, where we'll try to relate the local structural order of the system with the plastic rearrangements that is occurring due to the periodic shear in the steady states. So the idea of connecting local structure to dynamics is quite old. In fact, one of the pioneer works was from the paper of Charles Frank, where he asked the questions, in how many ways we can put 12 billiard balls in simultaneous contact with one. The answer to this question is three. We can do it three ways. We can do it by an FCC arrangement, by a BCC arrangement, and by a icosahedral arrangement. Now, FCC or BCC, they expand the space forming a crystal, whereas icosahedral clusters cannot do so. So then the idea came that maybe in the liquid configurations, we might find this kind of icosahedral clustering. So as we have discussed earlier, that in the supercool regime of the glass forming materials, the system, the relaxation time increases a lot. And in that regime, the system becomes dynamically heterogeneous. So in the middle, I have a plot from the a plot of a system interacting through Lennard-Jones potential, and with each particle there is a arrow associated with it, and the length and direction of these arrows represent that the particle displacement over the alpha relaxation time. We see that the parts with high displacement and parts with low displacement is actually spatially correlated. And then the idea came, maybe in the supercool regime, when the system has become dynamically heterogeneous, it can be related to the local favored structures. There has been many studies in this regard. So I am here presenting only one example from the group of Paddy Royal, where they find that indeed in the supercool regime, for their system, the icosahedral clustering, the association to icosahedral clustering increases at low temperatures. One recent development in this regard has been from Susanna in our group, where she proposed that instead of looking into complicated icosahedral cluster or other proposed clusters, why don't we look into the most simple cluster possible in 3 dimension, that is the tetrahedral cluster. And why don't we count that for each particle, how many tetrahedral clusters it is involved in? In fact, the icosahedral cluster, if a central particle is associated with a icosahedral cluster, that can be decomposed into 20 tetrahedral clusters. So what she finds, for a system of hard spheres in the dynamic heterogeneity, where the dynamic heterogeneity is present, that the parts of the system with higher number of tetrahedrality is related to the slower moving parts of the system. So in this work, we have used this tetrahedrality intet as one of our structural parameters to relate it to the plastic rearrangements in the system. Now, the other structural descriptor of our choice is the local entropy S2, which can be calculated from the integration over local radial distribution function. So in the right, I am showing one example for the case of nanocrystalline aluminium, where different phases of ordered and disordered structure can be successfully determined from the S2 calculation. So the take away message from here of tetrahedrality and S2 will be this, that in a system, if I for a particle, if I have a higher value of tetrahedra or a lower value of S2, that means at the local level, the structural or environment of the system is much highly ordered. So now we want to relate the structural order to dynamic heterogeneity. So for that, to the plastic rearrangements in the system. So for that, we start with the bidisperse model of glass forming, bidisperse model of Wanstrom, which is interacting through repulsive part of the Lennard-Jones interaction. And for this model, the yielding amplitude is close to 0.06. So we first compute the mean local order of S2 and Ntet across the yielding amplitude. We see that below yielding, in the absorbing state, if I am starting from high temperature glass, the number of tetrahedra increases and the S2 decreases. That means in the system, when the system is annealing, the local structural order in the system is increasing. However, for the low temperature glass, we don't see any appreciable change in the absorbing states. So structurally, they are quite similar. Above yielding, however, just like energy, we see that irrespective of their initial temperatures, the system reaches to the same structural order state. Now, above fielding, there appears shear band in the system. So we wanted to see the variation of our structural order parameters in the presence of shear band. Like before, we can compute the mean square displacement along in the direction perpendicular to the shear band, and we can locate the shear band. We see from both intet and S2. For example, the value of average intet is lower in the shear band regime and the average S2 is higher in the shear band regime. That means in the mobile shear band part, the local structural order is actually less compared to the part outside of shear band. So this now again gives the indication that the locally the part inside the shear band and the part outside the shear band have different structural environment. So next we want to see what happens to the plastic rearrangement in the course of cyclic deformation in the steady states of shear. So in the steady states of shear, as we explained earlier, from one cycle to the next, particles come back to the initial position if the shear amplitude is below yielding, and it cannot do so if the shear amplitude is above yielding. So during the deformation cycle, each particle can rearrange though, and we want to classify the particles who are going through higher rearrangements and which are going through lower rearrangements by computing the non-affine displacement. So for each particle, we compute the non-affine displacement during the course of cyclic deformation, and we record the maximum rearrangement it has gone through. Then we compare the structure it had at the beginning of the cycle. So we compare the value of S2 and intet at the beginning of the cycle. And for that structural information, we relate it to the particles that went through maximum or minimal rearrangement, and we classify them as mobile or static particles. So when we plot the distribution of initial S2 and intet for the mobile and static particles, we see that there is a clear difference. The mean of the distribution is different for static and mobile particles. In fact, if we look into the plot of S2, we see that for mobile particles, it has the mean S2 value of the S2 is higher. That means on the average, the mobile particles had lower structural order at the beginning of the cycle. Interestingly, we see from the distribution of tetrahedrality that in case of static particles, there is an abundance of the intet equal to 20. In fact, we might remember that this value of tetrahedrality equal to 20 is actually related to icosahedral clustering. That means that particles with tetrahedrality equal to 20 is reluctant to move as we are sharing our system. Now, this is an example plot for one particular temperature and one particular shear amplitude, and we repeat this for all the samples we have, and we plot the mean values of S2 and intet for mobile and static particles for all the gamma max values across yielding. What we see that for the mobile rate particles, consistently for all the gamma max values, it has lower structural order, lower intet or higher S2. For the static particles, with annealing, the structural order increases, and above yielding, the curves flattens out. Now, above yielding, the static part is actually the part belonging to outside of shear band, and the mobile part is the part inside of shear band. We'll see what happens in presence of shear band shortly. Next, what we did is we also analyzed the structure of static and mobile particles through topological cluster classification. So this algorithm can identify many kinds of local structures as shown in the illustration left. And for static and mobile particles, we analyze that which cluster associations they have. And if the clusters that show a difference between static and mobile particles, we plot a histogram for that. For example, if we look into the 13A, which we have highlighted, 13A corresponds to icosahedral clustering. We see that static particles have, for most of the cases, have high association with icosahedral clustering compared to the mobile particles. So since we have been talking about icosahedral clusters again and again, we want to see the cluster association to this particular cluster in the presence of shear band. So like before, in case of shear band, we can locate the shear band by computing the mean square displacement of the particles from one cycle to the next. And if we bin the system along this direction and we see for each along this direction, what is the percentage of the particles that have the association to icosahedral clustering, we see that outside of shear band, almost 30% of the particles is associated with icosahedral clustering. Whereas inside the shear band, this percentage is negligible. So this is very interesting because we now precisely can see that in presence of shear band, we definitely have different local environmental structure inside and outside of shear band. So to conclude from this part, what we have seen is local order in the system increases with annealing. Above yielding, irrespective of their initial temperature, the local order jumps to the same state. Particles that rearrange during a deformation cycle had lower local structural order to begin with on the average. And for particles which are involved in 20 icosahedral, 20 tetrahedral, they are reluctant to move as we share the system. And the mobile and static particles have very different type of local structural environment that we found from TCC analysis. And in presence of shear band, outside of shear band, almost 30% of the particles is involved in icosahedral cluster, whereas inside the shear band, this percentage drops to 0. So now I would like to conclude by thanking firstly my supervisor, Giuseppe Foffi, with whom I have worked for last 3.5 years. And I thank him for all the support he has given me. So my fund has been, my doctoral fund has been supported by CEFIPRA, which is a collaboration between India and France. So from the Indian part, my supervisor has been Professor Shrikant Shastri from the JNCSR Bangalore. In fact, I have spent some time in JNCSR, where I have worked with his students Anshul and Prem Kumar in the project of hyperuniformity. I thank Laura Filion and Emanuele from the Utrecht University for giving me the opportunity to work in a very exciting paper using machine learning to connect a local structure with the dynamic heterogeneity. In fact, in this project, we have worked, it was a joint project where we worked with Frank, Susanna, and Giuseppe as well. And I thank Professor Krishna Kumar, with whom I have worked in a project of hydrodynamic pattern formation, and that practically has been my first publication. I thank Shogata Bhattacharya from Vidyasagar College, University of Calcutta, and Bikram Prakrashi from University College Dublin for collaborating with me in a very exciting and crisp project in nonlinear dynamics involving Cinebilliard system. I thank all the people of my laboratory LPS or say, especially we have a very dynamic soft matter theory group. I thank Frank, Rick, and Anuradha, ma'am, for all the suggestions they have given me. I have shared my office with Claudia for almost 2 years, and I could ask her anything. And Susanna is a very good friend. Etienne is very passionate about science. I have enjoyed my discussions with him. Marina is the newest member of our group, and she is very friendly and energetic. I thank you all. So, and I also thank all the jury members today for taking their time from their busy schedule and joining me.